Have you ever done something that at the time seemed like a good idea, but then after the fact you realized not so much? Because after you actually follow through with the decision and do the thing that you were being tempted to do, the full range and perspective of what the implications and the effects of that decision were become revealed, and then wisdom and experience rush to the scene to inform you that that was in fact a bad decision. And this is how we learn from experiences, so that the next time a similar strand of logic proposes itself to us, we can look back and say, no, that was a bad decision last time, and it will be a bad decision this time. Certain aspects of faith are a lot like that. Faith could be described as holding fast to the things that you have come to believe, either through logic or experience, when temptation or your emotions rise up against you and test your resolve to hold fast to those things that you know or believe are true. So an obvious example, and probably even a cliche because it's recited so often, is when people go on all these drinking benders and then they wake up the next morning with a splitting headache and a bad hangover and a series of embarrassing memories, and they say to themselves, I am never going to do that again, because they are sober-minded and the wisdom of experience is reinforcing this wise conclusion. And then a few weeks go by and there's another opportunity to go out and do the same thing, and there's this subtle nudge saying, oh, this time will be different. This time will be more fun. This time you'll be more restrained and you'll be able to moderate yourself more. And it's in moments like this when we can stay true to our logical conclusions, the conclusions that we made when our emotions weren't rising up against us and tempting us to betray our own commitments, or we can discard the wisdom of past experiences and break faith with the things that we knew to be true when we weren't being tempted. Wisdom and experience have the power to teach us what is true, but it's up to us to ensure that we live by those lessons that we've learned and the wisdom that we've gained. Unfortunately, some of us seem dead set on repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And I think there's a similar pattern that persists in our own culture as well. And one of the easiest ways to identify it is by looking back 15 or 20 years at the things that we thought were heartbreakingly cool back then from popular culture. They were new and novel, and we had never seen or heard anything like them before, and so they mesmerized us. But with the passage of time and experience, wisdom sets in, and then we can look back at those things and see how vapid and empty they were. We can see them for what they were. And this pattern has been persistent, especially, and has been growing in influence in our culture for the past 100 years or so. And that's not to say that generations prior to that didn't have this influence of trends and fashions, but they often took a back seat to other more objective criteria like beauty. And so when we look back at the things that we were infatuated with 15 years ago, we experience a similar kind of pain of regret that we do right after we've made a bad decision, and then wisdom sets in. And I think it's important to ask ourselves what that can teach us. I think it should teach us a few things. And the first, and arguably one of the most important takeaways from this, is that our culture's expressions of popular art, design, and fashion are predicated on arbitrarily defined criteria. And novelty isn't good or objective, which is why it has no lasting power or quality. We initially take an interest in it because it's a strange spectacle that is foreign to our experience, but once that novelty wears off, we lose interest. And tragically, our culture has completely bought into this as a means for producing and selling art to us. It dominates popular music, it dominates architecture, it dominates graphic design, and it dominates fine art. And sadly, for those of us who are starving for objective beauty, we have to remain famished because the powers that be aren't going to give it to us. So what can we learn about this with regard to the Notre Dame fire and potential reconstruction? Well, Notre Dame And buildings like it are a leftover from an age that believed something fundamentally different about art and design. They believe that beauty is timeless and objective, and then they sought to produce art and design that is commensurate with that attitude. And that's why Notre Dame has had an appeal with people from every generation and culture. Its appeal transcends fashion and trend in a way that novelty cannot. So a good example of what I'm talking about actually comes from the city I live in. So back in the 1960s, the Alberta government allocated about $5 million, which if you adjust for inflation is about $40 million in today's value, to establish what is now known as the Royal Alberta Museum. And so what they got out of that was a brand new, state-of-the-art, trendy, modernist building featuring square design. Fast forward about 50 years later, and someone has decided that that building is obsolete, and so they've closed it down, and then they started construction on a new one. And with all the reading and research I did on this reconstruction, I couldn't find anybody to give an actual reason for why they decided it was obsolete. So I'm left to only speculate as to why that is. But I imagine, like any building of that age, its infrastructure started to require some maintenance and repair. And I expect that nobody was willing to do it because the affections that the old building used to arouse no longer existed. And that's probably because modernist design and the philosophy that reinforces it generates its appeal and therefore the affection of its users based on the newness of the design. If the design isn't new anymore, we won't like it anymore. And that's why modernist designs don't age well and quickly fall into disrepair. So considering the last building only got us 50 years of use, in spite of the fact that we invested millions of dollars into it, you'd think that with this time around, we'd learn from that experience and design something that has more lasting appeal and more sustainability. And so with a price tag of well over $300 million, we got this. A brand new, state-of-the-art, trendy, modernist building featuring a clean, squared design. And how is this better than the old building? Well, it's new. That's it. If a modernist building isn't new, it isn't attractive. By contrast, another famous architectural landmark in Edmonton is the Alberta Legislature building, which is about twice as old as the old Royal Alberta Museum and is based on a more classical design. Now, in spite of the age of this building and the lack of newness it suffers from, I don't think anyone would suggest that we should tear it down and rebuild it simply because it requires some upkeep. In fact, it seems that everybody is quite happy to do whatever maintenance it requires because it continues to arouse the affections of its viewers and its inhabitants. Ironically, this underscores how sustainable, beautiful architecture is, because when you design something with timeless beauty, successive generations will care for it in such a way that will ensure its longevity. Modern designs fall into disrepair because novelty can't sustain our affections. And eventually we start to treat them like we would an old pop song that we were embarrassed to admit that we actually liked at one time. And so we have to tear it down and waste innumerable resources to build something new just so that we can tolerate it. But just like with pop music, we're replacing it with the same thing, just newer. And so we continue to make the same mistakes over and over again, and we're not learning from our experiences. And yet buildings like Notre Dame have survived for 1,000 years, and nobody aside from pretentious modern architects would say that it needs an update of glass and steel to get with the times. The philosophy and culture that were able to give us buildings like Notre Dame were able to do so because the times took a backseat to the pursuit of objective beauty. And the results speak for themselves. People from all walks of life and from every generation have traveled from around the world to visit places like Notre Dame in Paris. And if it isn't Notre Dame, it's places like St. Peter's in Rome or Westminster Abbey in London. And nobody is designing buildings like that anymore. All we get are these uncreative glass and steel monstrosities that pollute our field of vision and then go out of style in a matter of decades at great cost to either consumers or taxpayers. And it's this kind of arrogant contempt for our heritage that turned places like Birmingham, England from this into this. And now with calls for a design competition to redesign and rebuild the roof and the spire of Notre Dame, already the earliest proposals are calling for absurd modernist sensibilities that would do nothing more than desecrate a once heroic manifestation of beauty. And then nobody will go out of their way to visit a place like Notre Dame, except to stare dumbfounded at what happens when you allow people who worship the current date simply because it is the current date to rebuild something that is incomprehensible to them because it transcends time altogether. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed that, then please consider subscribing and liking, and come find me on Facebook and Twitter. It's a huge help when you do that. It helps us get these videos in front of more and more people. And a big thank you goes out to You Catholic for presenting these videos. And if you want to support the making of these videos, then please consider supporting my work as a digital media and marketing expert. My company, Holdsworth Design, specializes in branding, web and graphic design, marketing, social media, videography, and all that kind of good stuff. So if you know of a parish, a diocese, a ministry, or a business that needs help in those areas, then please send them our way, and I'm sure we can help them out.